Recorded June 4th, 2015.
The Bitcoin Transaction Coordinator is a suite bundle that was developed by my firm, Prolecto Resources. We're a NetSuite systems integrator. It has been available since 2013. It has built for NetSuite certification since 2014. At this point here, I'd like to turn over the conversation over to Tony. Tony, I believe you should be able to speak.
Yeah, can you guys hear me now? It looks like it's going through. So my name is Tony Gallippi. I'm one of the co-founders of BitPay. We are the world leader in enterprise applications and solutions for Bitcoin. Talk a little bit about some of the apps that we've built, but we are based here in Atlanta, Georgia, which is a good payments hub, and we're up to about 70 employees. I'm going to turn my camera off and just let kind of Marty walk through the slides here. There we go. So real briefly, wanted to give you guys an overview of a topic and questions that we still get, even though it's in the news a lot. What is Bitcoin? Well, the real answer to this is Bitcoin is actually 4 different things. At its lowest level, it's a protocol. It's an open source protocol for the internet, much like we have HTTP for web browser protocols. We have SMTP for email protocols. Bitcoin is a protocol that allows nodes to communicate and relay transactions on a distributed ledger. When you have multiple nodes that are waking up and discovering each other, they form a network. And so Bitcoin with a capital B is also kind of the proper name for this distributed network of computers that is relaying transactions and keeping track of a ledger. Bitcoin is also a currency, and this is usually referred to with a lowercase b to kind of keep it separated. But when you're actually doing a transaction on the Bitcoin network, the unit of account that you're sending from one person to another or one address to another is the unit of Bitcoins. So you send Bitcoins over the Bitcoin network. But when you put it all together, you basically have a payment system, and we like to call it money over IP. It is an internet protocol. It works anywhere on Earth that internet access is available. There's lots of open source software, both server apps as well as client apps that can let people connect to it and do things with it. So to really understand why Bitcoin is different from other payment networks, you have to have a basic understanding of network architecture. And this is the only slide I'm going to go into that. This is not meant to be a network architecture class, but we really have 3 different types. A centralized network, you can think of this like PayPal. PayPal as a central hub, they do a very good job of connecting person to person and person to business all over the world, but every transaction has to come into that central hub at PayPal. Everybody has to trust PayPal. It's one central point that can get hacked, compromised, fail, and when it does, then everyone is affected. So it's difficult to get a broad reach with a centralized network, and you've got to be absolutely perfect in your boundary defenses and the integrity of that system. Next, we have a decentralized system. So this kind of takes the hub and spoke model and spreads it out a little bit. So a decentralized system, this is kind of the way our postal system works. It's also the way our banking and our correspondent banking system works. So if I'm a customer of one bank, the bank would be that kind of central hub, and if I want to send money to a person at another bank, the 2 hubs have to talk to each other. If these 2 banks do not have a direct relationship with each other, which many times they don't, they go through 1 or more hops in between. Could be intermediary banks, clearing banks, it could be a central bank, to be able to move money from point A to point B, much like the post office does. So there's a lot of inefficiencies in a system like this. Yes, you can get a broad reach, but every single hop that you have to take, it's going to add time, add cost, add risk to the transaction. Just like every time a letter gets handed off from one post office to another, there's a risk that it could get lost or damaged. The same thing is true with a payment transaction. If you're trying to send a wire from here to Germany, it's going to get handled by lots of people along the way, and there's lots of risk and cost and delays involved in that. Then we have distributed networks. So the internet itself is a distributed network. It was designed that way. It was designed so that in the event of a Cold War attack or somebody would attack us and wipe out half the servers in the country, that the nodes of this network could still find a way to communicate with each other. So there is no single point of failure, and it's very effective at creating what is commonly known now as a mesh network, that can really almost be unstoppable and very difficult to destroy. It's great, in the cases of mission critical applications. So if you wanted to go from one point on the chart to another point, you may take a different path every time you do that, but that's how it's designed. So Bitcoin is the first time we've ever had a distributed network for payments. It's extremely fast and efficient to get money from point A to point B anywhere in the world. It may take a different routing path every time it gets there, just like your email or your web packets do. But it's also extremely efficient. So Bitcoin is the first time we've ever had a mesh network for payments, and that offers a lot of innovation and things that we can build upon that. So what makes this work? Well, there's really three parts, and you can't really separate the three. So let me talk about each of them individually. So you have a distributed ledger. This is a ledger of accounts. If you imagine the PayPal model where everybody has to trust PayPal that they have a ledger of everybody's account number and balances, we all have to trust that one source. The distributed model basically takes that and turns it inside out. It gives every single user a full copy of the ledger. Every single person can see all the account numbers and the value in each one. There's just no personally identifiable information on each account number. However, we all have a copy of the ledger, and we all have a process at which we stay in sync because the ledger is continuously updated with new transactions, and we want to make sure that as a distributed consensus, every copy of the ledger can stay in sync. So the way that's done is as a distributed computing project. There have been several other distributed computing projects in the past, SETI at home, Protein Folding, where you can just donate some of your spare computing resources towards this computing project. The way Bitcoin solves it is using just a hashing algorithm that anybody could run on their computer. So let's say we have an example where we have thousands of copies of this distributed ledger out there, and there's a disagreement. Half of the copies think that the balances are a certain set of values, and then the other half disagree. They say no, the balances are this other half of values. With Bitcoin, there is no central referee. There's nobody to step in and make a decision. So all these participants amongst themselves, have rules at which they can agree upon a consensus, a totally distributed consensus of what is the valid state of the ledger and the state of transactions. So the way that the consensus is resolved is on the hash rate. So whichever version of this ledger has the majority of the computing power behind it is the one that will win. And what you see in the chart is the growth of this computing power over time. In 2009, it was relatively flat from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. But in 2010 is when it started ramping up. This is when people actually started hashing Bitcoins using their graphics cards instead of the basic CPU. So that's that huge upgrade cycle you see going from early 2010 to mid-2011. Each one of those horizontal lines, this is a log chart, it represents a 100 times increase. So this went up 10,000 times or more in a little over a year and a half. Then you kind of see a flat area from mid-2011 to early 2013. This is another hardware upgrade cycle where the mining switched from graphics cards to FPGAs. So an FPGA is a field programmable chip. It can offer roughly the same amount of hashing power, but a significantly lower electrical consumption. So the upgrade cycle here was more about power efficiency, not necessarily increasing your hash rate. Then in early 2013, the next ramp up that we've gone through, again, more than 100x, maybe again 10,000x increase. This is now ASICs. So this is where you're doing custom designed silicon chips specifically to hash the Bitcoin algorithm. Now, why in the world would somebody want to make specialty computers, invest in custom silicon? Why would they want to do this? It's because there's an incentive. The third part of what makes Bitcoin work is the reward. So new Bitcoins are introduced into circulation. They're given as a reward for people that contribute their computing power. So people who volunteer and contribute their computing power to help secure the system, they are rewarded with credits in the system. The credits are introduced over time as a time release. So this chart here, it's kind of hard to see the numbers at the bottom, but each one of those kind of knees in the curve is approximately 4 years apart. So the yellow dot the red dot represents where we are right now, about 6 years in. So we're halfway, we're more than halfway done in terms of introducing Bitcoins into circulation. So this is the time release formula that the creators of Bitcoin came up with. They wanted to incentivize people early on in the first 4 years to put a lot of computing power towards the network, because that's when there was the biggest reward. That's also when Bitcoin is its most vulnerable. So what you have here is you have a distributed ledger. It gets out there. If there's ever a disagreement, the disagreement is resolved, by whoever has the most hashing power, or whichever version of the ledger has the most hashing power. And then the incentive for providing hashing power is a reward in terms of new Bitcoin creation. And this is done as a time release over time. So where we're at right now, we've introduced about 14 million Bitcoins into circulation. That chart will top out at a little under 21 million. So we've got about 2/3 of the Bitcoins that have ever been created are already out there in circulation, and they're already out there in people's hands. So this chart basically shows you the transactions that are going across the network. So here's this totally peer-to-peer distributed network. Everybody's participating in it. How does it actually function? Well, this is going back to 2009 to the present day, the number of transactions per day that are taking place, that are being confirmed on this network. So around mid-2012 is kind of where you see a spike up where it starts to take off. The date on that is around June of 2012, and it's been growing pretty significantly ever since then. The network today is doing over 100,000 transactions per day on a sustained basis. So how does that compare to some other networks? Well, actually, the red line that I drew to kind of make it a little bit on a shorter time frame, at around 86,000, that represents 1 transaction per second. So the entire Bitcoin network in its distributed nature is confirming 1 transaction per second, and doing that very well. Compared to, say, Western Union has a lot of retail stores, but they also have a website and a mobile app. They do about 7 transactions per second. So we're still doing far less than Western Union. PayPal, who we've mentioned earlier, they've got a great internet-based system. They can do 110 transactions per second. So again, they're significantly faster and have higher bandwidth than the Bitcoin network. Then you get into the real high-speed stuff, right? So Visa Sustained does 2,500 transactions per second, but during their peak times, they can easily do 10 times this, right? They do 20, 30,000 transactions a second during the peak times. So, what you see here is basically just, a low bandwidth network, but there's nothing to preclude the network from being able to handle a higher volume of transactions. Much like the internet itself was relatively low bandwidth at first. You wouldn't dream of, downloading a 1080p movie streaming in the mid-90s. The bandwidth just wasn't there. But over time, as hardware accelerators were built in, as people were able to make apps and do compression more efficient, you were able to get more and more bandwidth on the network. And we'll be able to do the same thing over Bitcoin in the near future. So that's really just enough about Bitcoin itself. Now we want to get into BitPay. So BitPay, we focus on enterprise applications for Bitcoin and blockchain technology. There's really 3 different applications that we do. The first one that we're most known for is payment acceptance. So we help businesses accept payments over this Bitcoin network. A lot of our merchants, probably 95%, are e-commerce, right? They're trying to collect payments over the web. We also have the ability to collect Bitcoin payments in retail, but that's still a relatively small market today. E-commerce is typically where you've got all the pain and all the friction in trying to take existing payment methods, because quite frankly, credit cards and everything else was never designed for the internet, so it's kind of a clunky way that we use them today. So what's the value proposition? Why would a company want to accept Bitcoin on their website? Well, it's going to be lower risk and lower fraud than any other form of payment that they take. It's also going to be lower cost, but you're going to be able to reach a global customer base. Customers from India, China, Latin America, wherever they are in the world, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where the customer is. If you accept Bitcoin on your website, they can pay you. And that really opens the door a lot to more cross-border e-commerce, particularly if you're trying to sell something in a country where you just don't want to take a credit card from, or maybe you just can't take a credit card from. So that's our primary product, and that's the one that Marty has integrated into NetSuite, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The 2 other things that we do, these are still smaller projects. They're a little bit newer. Our payouts product, this is the opposite. This is for companies that need to do disbursements or pay out people all over the world. MassPay is kind of the killer app for this, right? It's a lot easier to pay 10,000 people around the world in Bitcoin than it is to try to get your bank to pay 10,000 people around the world. It can also be used for one-off B2B payments, for vendor payments, supply chain, right? The real value here is that Bitcoin is borderless, so you can get a payment delivered anywhere in the world, with relatively low cost in a short amount of time. Then we're working on a new project. We're calling it blockchain accounting, but this is using blockchain technology, basically distributed ledgers, to do stuff other than Bitcoin. And this can allow a company to run their own private chain. This can be used for property rights management. It can be used for equities. It can be used for a lot of things that are not necessarily using, Bitcoin as the unit of account. So why would somebody want to run their accounting system on blockchain technology? Well, you might be familiar with a concept called triple entry bookkeeping. So with blockchain technology, you can achieve this, right? You can timestamp the state of your general ledger at increments, and you can prove that it existed, at a state at a time in the past and up into the present. It also allows for continuous auditing. I just kind of cringe at the thousands of hours that we spend on auditors to pour through every transaction and come to the same conclusion that we did when we ran our program. So we're hoping that using blockchain technology, we can kind of automate a lot of the accounting and auditing functions, to be able to make the record keeping and reporting more streamlined. So that's a little bit farther down the road. The main product that we have today, and the one that we're going to be talking about, is the payment acceptance. That's the easiest one to get your head around. So just some stats on BitPay. We're the world leader in Bitcoin payment acceptance. Our e-commerce gateway is the world's first, and it still remains the most popular. So the interface for a company to accept a payment from us, it's going to look very similar to accepting a payment from Stripe or CyberSource or First Data or any other type of e-commerce gateway. On the back end, we also give our merchants the ability to receive a settlement every day directly to their bank, just like they would get from Stripe or First Data. So we take out all the risk of handling Bitcoin, all the Bitcoin volatility. Even though the mechanics of a Bitcoin payment work very differently from a card, we've designed a gateway interface as well and a settlement system that kind of mimics what people would be familiar with. So some stats of what we did last year: we did over 500,000 transactions on our platform, with over $158 million being spent. So people are spending Bitcoins. They're spending it on all kind of stuff. The three areas that we tend to get, I'd say, well above average traction are verticals such as digital goods. This can be, software, music, movies, games. It can be micropayments. Micropayments on the web are kind of cost prohibitive, but they work great with Bitcoin. And then any type of IT services, so domain registration, software as a service, web hosting, anything that you would need to set up, run, and operate a website, you can pay for in Bitcoin. So our market share globally at the end of the year was 55%. I think we've expanded that. We're probably over 60% now because we continue to grow faster than all of our competitors combined. We're pretty strong in Canada, Europe, and that just shows that we've been around the longest and we've got the most traction and the best product in the marketplace. So how we go to market: a company could come to us directly. Companies like Microsoft, Newegg, and other enterprise e-commerce companies, they come to us direct and do a direct integration and get a direct settlement from us. But a lot of our merchants now are actually accepting Bitcoin through a plugin or some type of integration that we've built, where they can just kind of install this plugin into whatever platform they already use. So for example, if they're an e-commerce platform that's built on Demandware, we have a Demandware cartridge, and they can just install it, configure it, and then Bitcoin appears as a checkout option when a customer wants to check out. We've got a similar type of plugin for Shopify, Magento, and a few others. So that's e-commerce. I think we got about maybe 30 of those now. On the retail side, NCR did an integration with us into their new iPad-based point of sale. It's called NCR Silver. So if you have a BitPay account, you can configure it, and then Bitcoin can appear as a tender type, when you're at a store and you're trying to check out. And we have a few other of those as well, some up and tabbed out. Payment service providers, companies like Adyen, that kind of offer a one-stop shop to merchants and help them accept 200 different payment methods, all in one API and one consolidated reporting and settlement. They've integrated BitPay as a payment method, so any one of their customers can turn it on without really doing a whole lot of work at all. So that's a great opportunity, and we've got a few of those additional ones that we've launched. One is in Mexico. It's called OpenPay. They just went live with us on Monday, and they've already got us live on a Mexican airline. And then we've got relationships with PayPal, Global Payments, Heartland Payments, right? Companies that have sales forces that people are asking about Bitcoin. We've got a solution for them as well. Then on the accounting side, Marty's going to talk about the NetSuite integration. Because we realize that not only do companies need to collect Bitcoin as payment, but they've got to import or bring all of these transactions into their accounting system and be able to reconcile them. So Marty's done a really good job, and he'll show you the features right now. It goes above and beyond everything else that we built. In QuickBooks and Xero, you kind of have to grab a file from BitPay and then import it into your accounting package. The way Marty did it is that it's instantly there in your general ledger.
Great. Thank you, Tony. Very, very, very good summary of BitPay. We're very excited to have the partnership with Tony and his organization and the leading payment platform provider. I thought it would be valuable here to demonstrate and talk about traditional electronic payment methods, right? And typically things you don't like, that the merchants don't like, which are what NetSuite customers are, right? And in contrast these, right? When you see that, merchants do electronic payments, they typically are paying 2 to 3% transaction fees, negligible in the Bitcoin network. Chargeback risk, things that we're always helping our clients worry about and so forth. Irreversible payments on the Bitcoin network. Chargeback risk is gone. Slow settlement, instantaneous settlement, right? Traditional electronic methods, right? Limited customer reach. Anybody on the internet who has Bitcoin can participate. All kinds of conversations and concerns around card number security and so forth. Bitcoin extremely secure, right? All the reconciliation nightmares and so forth that you have to handle with electronic payments and so forth is, as you'll see in our implementation, the accounting's been automated, right? And as we know, as more and more companies are concerned about data breaches and so forth, all the privacy concerns and so forth are easily compromised in traditional electronic payment methods. Bitcoin has privacy by design. The value proposition for a merchant is very, very compelling. Really, there's really no reason not to accept Bitcoin into the business, along with, of course, all the traditional ones. So in order to demonstrate this, we're going to talk about using Bitcoin in the accounting system in two different methods. The most simple way is treating Bitcoin as a payment method. In this case, it acts very simple, like PayPal or like cash in the operation. The business is not using Bitcoin at all in its operation, right? And there's no valuation risk whatsoever in terms of the Bitcoin prices going up and down relative to the merchant. And it would just look like a payment option and so forth, along with all the traditional ones that we normally see. There is also another operating mode which is much more advanced, where Bitcoin acts as a foreign currency. And this is valuable for merchants that decide they actually want to hold Bitcoin, and they may then want to price goods and services in Bitcoin. And once you have Bitcoin, you may want to be in a disbursement cycle where you want to pay folks. Most of the conversation that I'm in with prospective people who want to use this platform are concerned with valuation risk and so forth, so they want to use it as a simple payment method. But we'll go through the demonstration of each one of these so you can understand the differences. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to demonstrate using Bitcoin with BitPay through a NetSuite site builder e-commerce integration, and I'll also demonstrate it in the back office so I can show these two operating modes. So I'm going to do that right now. So I'm in a development account to demonstrate this, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through an e-commerce checkout experience here. And we're going to go ahead, and I've I've actually dropped the price of this good just for demonstration purposes to $10 because I'm going to actually transact with Bitcoin. So let me add that to the shopping cart. And I'm going to go ahead and proceed to checkout. And I'm a continued customer, so I'm going to go ahead and sign in. And at this point right here, what we would illustrate is that we can accept Bitcoin as another option here. Now, one of the things that we would work with customers on is the actual display of the different payment methods and so forth. I'm going to go ahead and say Bitcoin here, but we would actually show another icon there, and we're going to go ahead and say, okay, my payment method is Bitcoin. I'm going to go ahead and now submit the order for $10. So we're going through a traditional checkout on the NetSuite platform here. Order being accepted. Okay, great. Now at this point, the order's been taken, and now what we're showing is the BitPay integration right here. As you can see, it says, okay, it's this powered by Bitcoin. This is please pay with Bitcoin and so forth. This is for people in the Bitcoin network. They understand how to operate with this. But before we do that, we're going to take a look at the order before we pay it, just so we can get ourselves oriented about what's going on this transaction, right? So I'm going to look at the order. The order has been accepted. And this will help show some of the back office integration that has occurred. Let's load that up. Okay, so now we have an order for the camera and so forth, and under the payment option here, whoops, I'm sorry, right over here, there's another tab. We have another tab here for BTC4ERP, Bitcoin Transaction Coordinator. And what you'll see in here is you'll see a request. And if we take a look at this request, this is the Bitcoin transaction request. This is representative of the Bitcoin of the transaction request that's currently out there for the e-commerce customer. The status right here says it's been requested, right? And so what I'm going to do is now I'm going to pretend I am the actual end customer. Let me turn on the camera here so you can see me. Very good. Okay. And I'm going to bring up my wallet here. And if you guys can see me here, make sure you can see me on the okay, very good. All right, so what we're going to do here is I've got a Bitcoin wallet, and I'm going to actually just take this and I'm going to scan that QR code, not touching the keyboard, right? Get a little closer to it. Having trouble reading it today. Normally this is no problem. There we go. All right, and it says it actually puts in the actual amount, right? Exactly what to pay, and I just basically hit send. And as I hit send, it's being broadcast now over the Bitcoin network, right? And at this point, what should happen there you go. It says the invoice is being paid, right? So from my perspective as the customer, I have now paid the e-commerce merchant for the goods and services, and I am done with payment. It is complete. So I'm going to shut off the camera because we're done with that portion of this. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to go back into NetSuite, and we're going to just basically ask the back end, you know, what has occurred with this. And at this point, the status changed to sending, which means that it's sitting inside the BitPay network being processed, and there is a process for how long typically there's a certain amount of time that you want the transactions to be verified by the network before you say that they're safe to fulfill. This is configurable actually by our system and so forth. And we're basically saying, is the order safe to fulfill? We're saying no, not at this point. It is not safe to fulfill. Okay. However, what I can do is show you some other transactions that we previously did do that where they were safe to fulfill. For example, here's one where, sorry, not this one here. Let me do it a different one right here. Look at the BitPay ones right there. There we go. Here's one that I did earlier this morning just to make sure everything was good with the software for the demonstration. And it says, is it safe to fulfill? Yes, it's safe to fulfill. We can take a look at the order here, right? And from this perspective, now the order is safe to fulfill. If we were to go back to the sales order that originally initiated this, and we were to take a look at the transaction down here, we would see that it is safe to fulfill. Okay. Now, what I'd like to also illustrate here is some of these other requests here. As Tony's BitPay backend processes the transactions, we do also additional kind of accounting, and you can see here that as it fully gets through the network, we actually create a customer deposit. So when the money actually arrives and so forth, we create a customer deposit, which basically then has money on an account, so that when the sales order is actually fulfilled and you invoice it, you apply the payment and you're effectively done. In this case here, money's going to arrive as a bank deposit. The money arrives in advance of fulfillment, right? And the merchant has no risk relative to chargebacks and so forth. And again, that could have been anywhere on the planet. Naturally, merchants may have different policies for where they ship and so forth. But as far as payment's been concerned, that's been taken care of. Nice, great thing with BitPay's back end. You charge $10, you will receive $10, even though the transaction was done in BitPay and so forth. All that valuation risk was handled for you. So that's the payment method. Should look very similar to other kinds of payment methods and so forth. And so forth, but we're using a customer deposit mechanism in order to handle the accounting. Now what I'd like to demonstrate is I'd like to show a more advanced mode, which is for customers that would want to hold Bitcoin. And in this case, we're going to be treating it as a foreign currency. So the first thing we need to show is that in the setup, we've needed to first, in the currencies, we're going to actually take one of the currencies inside NetSuite, and this one I chose the Thai baht, and I'm going to substitute it for Bitcoin. And I basically got a little symbol there that I'm kind of representing as micro Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is 8 decimal places. The accounting systems are generally only able to handle 2 decimal places, but by logically saying that we're going to accept Bitcoin at the micro level, by shifting over the decimal places by 6 places, we can now begin to treat Bitcoin just like any other foreign currency. So once we've defined the currency, the next thing that we need to look at is pricing. So we can, part of our service brings in prices on a scheduled basis, configurable by each NetSuite account. And here you can see that the last price we did was at 10 o'clock this morning, and the price was $227, and that will actually then effectively create a particular price in micro Bitcoins right there. And then if we go back over into NetSuite's currency exchange rates, you'll see over here that Bitcoin is priced right there at $227, right? And now at this point, it's just like foreign currency, just like any other foreign currency, and it can take advantage of all the power that NetSuite has relative to foreign currency transactions. So let's take a look at how that might look from a back office perspective. Let's pretend that we are going to do an order over the phone for a customer, and we want to price and denominate in Bitcoin. Let's grab one here. Great, and I'm going to go ahead and grab this one right here. All right, great. So I'm going to buy something that's $1, right? And if I so choose, I can say, well, I want to price this in Bitcoin. Voila, there's the price in Bitcoin, right? So if you decide you want to price in Bitcoin, you can. There's the exchange rate right there, or you don't have to. Ultimately, though, you can say, okay, I'm selling something for $1. We come over to the billing area here, and then we can come down here and we can actually say, what are we going to do? We're going to actually, this is the number of Bitcoins that would be required at this effective rate, which would be the request, and we would go through a transaction cycle, just like we did with the other. Now let me also illustrate one other thing that's important here. And when we look back at our transaction requests, we also produce communications, which are all configurable by NetSuite using the advanced PDF environment that NetSuite customers love. So the first thing we did with this request, we created an email out to the merchant. Please go ahead, or sorry, the end customer sends out an email saying that please send this many Bitcoins and so forth, pay this address and so forth. When the funds have been received by the network, automatically we'll show a Bitcoin payment confirmation. This gives comfort to the end customer that all things look good and so forth. So all those communications are all configurable via what we call Bitcoin profiles. And here we can have multiple profiles to drive different kinds of transactions. Here is basic kinds of setup for how you drive your basically processor rules, exchange rates, various linkages to the accounting system, ultimately your emails and so forth, your templated communications and so forth. And then you have all kinds of ledger entries and various other kinds of things that help you manage the account. Finally, in a foreign currency kind of context, we can bring things onto the balance sheet. In this case here, we could demonstrate that we have $542.12 worth of Bitcoin, but you can see that this would be the total number of micro Bitcoins. The way I usually interpret this is for people who are accustomed to using Bitcoin and not at the micro level, they could just say that's 2.2 Bitcoin and so forth. Okay, so that's the heart of the demonstration. Let me move on. We'll get to questions here real quick. Okay, so what is the activation process to get this work? Well, the first thing you would do is you would sign up with BitPay and activate their basic subscription. And then you would sign up for the Bitcoin transaction coordinator. We typically schedule a 1-hour handheld installation to make sure everything goes smooth and to produce an orientation. And then ultimately we got to plan any e-commerce flows while we're demonstrating that we can do the e-commerce pieces and so forth. Most e-commerce companies have certain design requirements and so forth that they care about, and so those are consultations that we talk through to make those things active. Pricing. On the BitPay side, their basic plan is basically completely free. For higher levels of services and so forth, they offer different kinds of monthly plans and so forth, but to get this active, you just need the basic plan. For the Bitcoin transaction coordinator, it is too free. We basically charge free for 10 transactions each quarter. Thereafter, if you're processing more than 10 transactions a quarter, we charge 0.5% at a declining rate. Well, effectively, we are trying to make sure that people can evaluate and make it become their preferred payment method with essentially no risk, and significantly drive down the cost of payment processing. So I'm going to go to questions. I think I see some questions here. First question, can you talk about how one would offer Bitcoin as a payment option on a transaction or an invoice? And I think it was continued here. So the transaction would be in USD, but the option to pay an alternative would be a regular PDF option. Yes. So if we wanted to, we could demonstrate that. Let me go back to that real quick. We would. One sec, where is this? All right, let's go back to the sales order that we were working on. we were working on the, let's go through that transaction again. In this case, let's go ahead and go through that customer again. We'll go ahead and finish that transaction to demonstrate it. So you can completely transact from the back office. You do not need a website in order to process. I'm going to grab that one here. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to make this same thing $10. So I'm going to do 10 right there. This point, we're keeping it as dollars, right? We then would go over to the billing area. We're going to choose a payment method. I'm going to use BitPay's payment method. Come over to BTC4ERP. I basically say initiate payment request on save. I save the transaction. So we could choose to denominate in US dollars or the local currency, or you can choose to denominate in Bitcoin. Not a problem. Choose to denominate in any currency is how we've actually designed it, and pay with Bitcoin. So now if I go over to the billing, I go to my BTC4ERP, notice I have a link now to my transaction request. We load that. We can take a look under communications. I would have the email, which would go out. I now on the other side would receive this. Here I get the order. I'm going to go ahead and pay it again. Let me just go through that. Just a moment here. I'm going to click scan just a second here. Great. I hit send. Should just take a sec. All right, I just hit send. And let's see what happens here. Usually it's pretty quick. Very good. All right, that's done. That's been paid, right? And if I refresh this transaction, it says it's sending, that the status has changed, right? There's now the email has been confirmed under communications. We have now just said that it has been paid, right? And you're effectively done. Hopefully that answered your question. If we have any other questions, we can please chat them in the box. Okay, wait, we got another one. How are fraudulent transactions handled by the vendor and the victim? Okay, so first of all, the nature of fraudulent transactions change in here. So don't know what you're saying about fraudulent. They're basically Bitcoin transactions. That's one of the things is that fraudulent transactions are effectively eliminated. So it's really, Tony, could you comment on how you might respond to such a question?
Sure. Fraud and risk is quite a bit different with Bitcoin than it is with credit cards. With credit cards, it's a pull type transaction where the shopper enters their 16-digit account number, their name, address, expiration date, and then the processor basically goes and checks to see if there's money available, and then if it is, it pulls it from their account. That system works great in the 1950s. It just doesn't really work great on the internet. Because the situation that you have now is that the credentials that you need to shop, the 16-digit account number and the supporting data, it's good to approve one transactions, but those same exact credentials can be used to do thousands more transactions. And so we have a dispute process, whereas if you're a card holder, and if somebody either cloned your card or stole your card, you can call your bank and complain, and you can say, hey, this wasn't me. Somebody stole my card, and then that initiates a whole dispute process and a chargeback. So the banks don't take responsibility for that. They may give you your money back, but they're not going to eat it. They're going to issue the charge back to the business, and they're going to take that money back away from the business. So if you're a business now, you're basically on the hook, right? So you have to have your own proprietary analytics to try to screen in real time for potential fraud, right? Is this person shopping and attempting to make a purchase, really the card holder who has that account? Because if it's not and you ship that merchandise, well, then you're going to be out of luck. So fraud with Bitcoin completely solves that problem because Bitcoin is a push transaction. So there is no account number. There is nothing where you query and you see how much money a person has and it potentially could get reversed on you later, right? That does not exist. So Bitcoin as a push transaction is very similar to, say, text messages or email, where once you compose it and you send it, you can't unsend, right? So the recipient, once he gets it, it's his, and it can't be taken away from them. So this is a very merchant-friendly payment system, meaning that once a payment is received by you, a business, it can't be reversed and it can't be taken away from you. So you can ship your merchandise with confidence that you're not going to get a chargeback or a dispute. So the fraud in the typical types of payment sense completely goes away. Now there's different types of concerns now. As a shopper now, I'm more concerned about theft rather than identity theft. I'm more concerned if somebody actually gets a hold of my phone or my wallet, then suddenly they can start spending my money. Just like if they were to reach into my pocket and steal my leather wallet, well, they're going to be able to go out and start spending that money. So there's different types of behavioral adjustments that people have to learn about. But most people, at least the early adopters in Bitcoin, they're pretty well familiar with it. So it is a bit of a security issue. It becomes more of a vaulting problem. I need to secure this data and this phone and make sure that people can't get into it. But once I push a payment out to a business, that payment is clear, and there's really no risk of fraud on the receiving side.
That's a very good explanation, Tony. I like to also think of it as it's similar to cash in that I have cash in my back pocket, and if I'm, I need to take care of my wallet in my back pocket. But if somebody were to steal my wallet and run off to the grocery store and use my cash, I wouldn't, as the victim of that, run to the grocery store and say, well, somebody stole my cash and spent it, right? I would be really trying to get resolution from the person who stole my car or stole my cash. So I think of it very similar to there. Okay, I don't see any other questions and so forth. I think without any other questions, I think we should conclude. I think we're good. Thank you, everybody, for your time today, and we appreciate it. If you have questions and so forth, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to answer your questions.